The telegram arrived on a Sunday evening, and the man who read it understood immediately that the world was about to change. He stood in a private room on Downing Street, the paper thin between his fingers, the ink still faintly damp. Outside, fog pressed against the windows. London was muffled, distant, invisible. Inside, the fire burned low. The room smelled of coal, smoke, and old leather. He read the message twice, then a third time, not because he misunderstood it, but because he needed to feel the weight of what it meant. The ruler of Egypt was bankrupt. He was selling his stake in the Suez Canal. He needed the money within days, not weeks. And if Britain did not act, France would. The man holding the telegram was Benjamin Disraeli, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The date was November 1875. The location was the heart of an empire that depended, more than anything else, on a narrow strip of water 6,000 miles away. The Suez Canal was not just infrastructure, it was the nervous system of British power. Before the canal opened in 1869, ships traveling from London to India had to round the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. The journey took months. Men died of fever, cargo spoiled. Storms destroyed entire fleets. The route was slow, dangerous, and expensive. The canal cut through Egypt and connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. It reduced the voyage to India by half. It turned weeks into days. For Britain, which governed India and depended on Indian cotton, tea, grain, and taxes to fund its economy, the canal was not optional. It was existential. But Britain did not own it. The canal had been built by a French engineer named Ferdinand de Lesseps. It was financed by French investors and the Egyptian government. The shares were split. France held just over half, and Ismail Pasha, the Khedive of Egypt, held 44%. Britain had opposed the project from the beginning. British engineers said it was impossible. British politicians called it a French conspiracy. When the canal opened, Britain watched as French flags dominated the most important waterway in the world. Now, in November 1875, the Khedive was offering his shares for sale. £4 million. Immediate payment required. If France bought them, the canal would become a French monopoly. If Britain bought them, the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean would shift overnight. Disraeli understood this, but he also understood that he could not act. The British government could not spend money without parliamentary approval. This was not a suggestion. It was constitutional law. Parliament was in recess. It would not reconvene for weeks. By then, the Khedive would have defaulted on his debts, or the French would have closed the deal. There was no legal mechanism for Disraeli to authorize the purchase, no emergency fund, no executive discretion. If he spent £4 million without Parliament's consent, he would be accused of violating the Constitution. His rivals would call for his impeachment. His career would end. But if he did nothing, the canal would be lost. He stood at his desk and considered the problem. He was 70 years old. His health was fragile. His political enemies were numerous. William Gladstone, his great rival, believed in fiscal restraint and moral governance. Gladstone would never approve a secret foreign purchase. He would call it reckless imperialism. He would demand inquiries, debates, votes. Disraeli did not have time for votes. He called his private secretary into the room. The man's name was Montagu Corey. He was young, loyal, and sharp. Disraeli looked at him and asked where they could find £4 million by Tuesday. Corey did not laugh. They went through the options. The Bank of England was the obvious choice, but the governor would never approve such a loan without parliamentary authorization. He would ask for paperwork, guarantees, committees. There was no time. Disraeli needed a private lender, someone with enough liquidity to move millions in gold at a moment's notice, someone who trusted him personally, someone who understood that this was not just a financial transaction, but a geopolitical turning point. There was only one name that fit. Lionel de Rothschild was the head of the London branch of the most powerful banking family in Europe. The Rothschilds had financed wars, railways, and governments. They had branches in Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, and Naples. They moved gold across borders faster than any institution in the world. Disraeli and Rothschild were friends. They shared a bond that went deeper than politics. Disraeli had been born Jewish, though he was baptized as a Christian. He had faced prejudice his entire life. Rothschild was the first practicing Jew to sit in parliament, and he had fought for years to take his seat. They were both outsiders who had reached the pinnacle of power. Disraeli told Corey to go to the City of London immediately. He told him to find Rothschild at his offices at New Court. He told him to ask for £4 million. Corey asked what security he should offer. Security was collateral. It was the guarantee that a borrower would repay a loan. Normally, you offered land, gold, or government bonds. Disraeli had none of those things. He did not even have the legal authority to make the request. He looked at Corey and said, "Tell him the security is the British government." It was a bluff, a magnificent, reckless bluff. Disraeli was betting his entire career on a handshake. If Parliament refused to ratify the deal, Disraeli would be ruined. Rothschild would lose his money. The scandal would bring down the government. Corey put on his coat and walked out into the fog. The offices of N.M. Rothschild and Sons were not a typical bank. They were a palace of finance. Corey was ushered into a private room where Lionel de Rothschild was waiting. The legend says he was eating grapes. Corey stood there, his heart pounding, and delivered the message. He said that Mr. Disraeli needed £4 million tomorrow. Rothschild paused. He ate another grape. He asked what the security was. Corey replied exactly as he had been instructed. The British government. Rothschild considered this. Then he said simply, "You shall have it." No lawyers, no contracts, no board meeting, just a gentleman's agreement between the Prime Minister of the world's greatest empire and the head of the world's greatest bank. The Rothschilds began mobilizing their network. They gathered gold and credit from across Europe. They prepared the transfer to Cairo. When Corey returned to Downing Street with the news, Disraeli sat down and wrote a letter to Queen Victoria. He wrote, "It is settled. You have it, madam." In Cairo, Ismail Pasha was pacing in his palace. He was a man of immense ambition and catastrophic judgment. When he came to power, he had looked at the dusty streets of Cairo and decided to turn them into Paris. He built opera houses, palaces, railways, and telegraph lines. He hired Italian architects and French chefs. When the Suez Canal opened, he threw the largest party the world had ever seen. He built a road from the pyramids to the palace so his guest, Empress Eugénie of France, would not get dust on her dress. He commissioned Giuseppe Verdi to write an opera. Champagne flowed. Diamonds were distributed like party favors. But he did not have the money to pay for it. He borrowed from European banks at 10% interest, then 12, then 20. In the 1860s, during the American Civil War, the price of Egyptian cotton had skyrocketed. Ismail believed the boom would last forever. When the war ended, the price collapsed. His income disappeared. His debts did not. By 1875, the interest payments alone consumed almost the entire revenue of the Egyptian state. Soldiers went unpaid. Teachers went unpaid. The treasury was empty. A major debt payment was due in a matter of weeks, and Ismail had nothing left to sell except his shares in the Suez Canal. He did not want to sell them, but he had no choice. He let the French government know quietly that he was willing to negotiate. The French were ecstatic. If they bought his shares, they would control the entire canal. But there was a leak. A British journalist heard a rumor. He told the Foreign Office. The Foreign Office told Disraeli. Now, in his palace in Cairo, Ismail was waiting for a signal from London. The French agents were pressing him to sign. They told him the British were too slow. They told him Parliament would never agree. Ismail stalled. He preferred the British to the French, but he was desperate. If the British did not come through, he would sign with France. The next day, the money arrived. Ismail was relieved. He paid his immediate debts. He sent the French agents away. The British consul general marched into the palace and took possession of the physical share certificates. They were packed into iron boxes and shipped to England on a warship. The British public went wild. Newspapers hailed Disraeli as a genius. Even Gladstone, his rival, admitted the public was on Disraeli's side. But the story did not end with the purchase. £4 million was a lot of money, but for Ismail, it was not enough. His debts were so massive that the money vanished almost instantly. It went to pay interest on other loans. Within months, he was bankrupt again. This time, things were different. Before the sale, Britain had been an observer in Egypt. Now, Britain was a shareholder. Britain owned nearly half the canal. This meant Britain had a direct financial interest in the internal affairs of Egypt. When Ismail announced in 1876 that he could not pay his debts, the British government could no longer say this was a private matter. It was now a matter of national security. The British and French governments sent a commission to Cairo to investigate Ismail's finances. They opened the books and found corruption and waste on a staggering scale. They decided that Ismail could not be trusted with money. They set up a system called the dual control. An English official was placed in charge of Egypt's revenue. A French official was placed in charge of Egypt's expenditure. They effectively took over the Egyptian government. They slashed spending. They raised taxes on the peasants. They cut the pay of the army. They did everything a ruthless bankruptcy lawyer would do, but they did it to an entire country. The Egyptian people were furious. They saw their ruler as a puppet. They saw their taxes going to Christian and Jewish bankers in London and Paris while their children went hungry. A nationalist movement began to rise. It was led by an army officer named Colonel Ahmed Arabi. He rallied the army and the people with the slogan, "Egypt for the Egyptians." He wanted to expel the foreign advisors. He wanted to end the dual control. He wanted to establish a parliament. The British government watched this with alarm. They did not care about Egyptian democracy. They cared about the Suez Canal. They were terrified that a nationalist government would seize the canal or refuse to pay the debts. Bondholders in the City of London pressured the government to intervene. They whispered that Arabi was a dangerous radical. They said the canal was in danger. In 1882, the tension exploded. Riots broke out in Alexandria. Europeans were killed. The British government, now led by Gladstone, who had once opposed Disraeli's imperialism, felt compelled to act. They sent the Royal Navy to Alexandria. They bombarded the city. The fortifications were destroyed. Fires spread through the streets. Then they landed troops. They marched toward Cairo. At the Battle of Tel el-Kebir, the British army crushed Arabi's forces. The British cavalry rode into Cairo and took control of the citadel. Ismail had already been deposed by the British and replaced by his son, Tufik, who was compliant. The British general announced that they were there only to restore order. He promised they would leave as soon as stability was secured. They never left. The temporary occupation lasted 72 years. The £4 million loan had turned into a military conquest. This was the true legacy of the Suez Purchase. It changed the nature of the British Empire. Before Suez, Britain preferred to trade with countries rather than rule them. They called it the imperialism of free trade. They did not want the burden of governing millions of people in the Middle East. They just wanted to sell them cotton and buy their grain. But the debt changed everything. The debt created a chain. Once Britain bought the shares, they had to protect the shares. To protect the shares, they had to control the Egyptian government. To control the government, they had to occupy the country. To secure the occupation, they eventually had to take control of Sudan and the headwaters of the Nile. It was mission creep on a continental scale. Disraeli died in 1881, before the occupation began. He never saw British troops marching into Cairo. He thought he had made a clever financial deal. He did not realize he had started a chain reaction that would define the modern Middle East. The Suez Canal became the obsession of British foreign policy. It dictated their strategy in World War I and World War II. It was the reason they betrayed the Arabs after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. It was the reason they drew the borders of the Middle East the way they did. They needed to keep the canal safe at all costs. The Rothschilds made a profit. The British government repaid them as soon as Parliament returned and voted on the bill. The Rothschilds proved once again that they were the indispensable bankers of kings. But for the people of Egypt, the loan was a tragedy. It was the moment their leader sold their future to pay for his past. Debt is a weapon. It does not announce itself with fanfare. It does not require soldiers or warships at first. It requires only a signature, a handshake, a telegram sent on a foggy Sunday night. The British did not need to invade Egypt in 1875. They just needed a checkbook. The army came later to collect the bill. The Suez Canal Purchase was not an act of war. It was an act of finance. But finance has consequences that ripple outward in ways that no one can predict. A desperate ruler sells an asset. A rival empire seizes an opportunity. A loan becomes leverage. Leverage becomes control. Control becomes occupation. The people who paid the price were not the bankers in London or the statesmen in Paris. They were the farmers in the Nile Delta who saw their taxes rise. They were the soldiers who were not paid. They were the clerks and teachers and laborers who watched their government become a subsidiary of foreign powers. When the British finally left Egypt in 1954, the canal was still there. So was the debt. So was the resentment. The Suez Crisis of 1956, when Egypt nationalized the canal, and Britain, France, and Israel invaded, was not a new conflict. It was the same conflict 70 years later. It was still about who controlled the canal. It was still about debt and sovereignty and the violence that happens when empires decide they cannot afford to let go. The fog that rolled off the Thames on that Sunday night in 1875 has long since lifted. But the decisions made in that private room on Downing Street are still visible in the borders, the grievances, and the wars of the Middle East today. Disraeli thought he was securing the route to India. He did not realize he was writing the opening chapter of a story that would take more than a century to unfold. If you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from.